Hello, everybody. So, as we've seen in the past few years, cyber attacks are not limited solely to the systems that we expect to be attacked, like defense, but systems that we don't traditionally think of as security relevant. And there's a number of our systems coming online versus the old, it's inside the wall with no connection to the internet. The number of types of attacks has also been increasing. And obviously, we're also no longer limited to just malware, ransomware. We're starting to see influencing of public opinion. We're seeing attacks towards critical infrastructure like power control. We're even seeing, as we saw, it seems like we've been seeing voting attacks into those systems. And as these threats are rapidly evolving, in breadth and sophistication, what we are afraid of seeing is that our procurement processes and the compliance processes that go with that to ensure that we are getting the correct solutions out there are not keeping pace with the technologies to be able to have updated solutions, new technologies deployed rapidly enough to be able to shore up vulnerabilities while still ensuring that we can accomplish the agency mission. So what we see is that this means that we need to be able to absorb the innovation required to counter these threats in time to stay one step ahead of our adversaries. So this puts significant pressure on the federal processes and procedures. And as modern systems are significantly complex when we get into having cyber components, we're seeing that this makes it difficult for the acquisition systems to recognize and understand how we can build proper procedures for the procurement strategies so that we can recognize the appropriate levels of risk and make our decisions. So while cybersecurity is not specifically the role of the federal acquisition community, it is critical that the procurement processes include consideration of cyber threats within these modern systems. Cybersecurity requirements cannot just be a checkbox on an acquisition form, but must be considered and reviewed. And many times I've seen this, that we get asked, do you meet some requirement? Yes, checkbox, okay, next. Now, why have they thought about that? What is the reason that that's there? Well, someone told them to put that on the box, but we really need to start thinking about what does that mean and what does that imply about these systems that are being deployed. So government must continue to find means to keep pace with the rate of technology change and to understand these cyber threats posed by these new systems that we're working on. So today I'd like to challenge us to continue pushing the status quo when it comes to federal compliance procurement and accelerating the agency access to these innovations that are coming out from our vendors. One of the first aspects to tackle this is ensuring a common understanding within not just the federal acquisition community, but the broader set of agencies, so that cybersecurity requirements can be well understood by both IT and procurement. This is critical so that federal can speak as one voice to the industry, and we as the vendors can then understand which capabilities are going to be required by the federal government. But part of the problem here is that cybersecurity can be its own language with its own acronyms, definitions, and there can be overlap between different areas that we can talk about. For example, in wireless, I might have an acronym that means one thing and be completely different when I'm talking about a firewall. And how exactly can experts make sure that this is well understood, much less someone who's in procurement or acquisition scope who is not a cybersecurity expert or a technology person. And in some ways, this is one of our key problems that we see, is that there's a difficulty in communicating between procurement and IT and vendor community because we're not all speaking the same language. Having a common platform for discussing the cybersecurity requirements across all of federal will enable the agencies to pursue their needs and be able to do that to the benefit of the whole government. Consistent language obviously could then be well understood by the experts, the acquisition teams, and ensure that the proper solutions are defined so that we can, as vendors, can build the solutions that they will need. Now, due to the uniqueness of the federal government's organization compared to the private sector, it is possible for disparate cybersecurity requirements to be requested by different agencies. So this then gives us inconsistent security across different systems. Of course, this could lead to potential attacks between when systems are interconnected, as we're seeing more of today, and we need to be able to bring systems together to meet the needs of the government. And so, as we know, security is only as strong as our weakest link. And so what we don't want, obviously, is to have many weak links. By establishing a common framework, a good example is the NIST cybersecurity framework, which has been widely accepted across the government and also by many in industry, it should be possible that we can start ensuring common requirements across the federal agencies using a common language. Ensuring that this is well understood by the acquisitions community, either directly or in partnership with NIST or other experts, will provide a stronger assurance of cybersecurity capabilities that can be deployed in these systems. While the federal government is unique in both its organization and threats, it does share more in common with the private sector, though, than is normally acknowledged. Its similarities and common ground between the public and private sectors that needs to get more attention going forward for countering the evolving cyber threats that we see today. While many industries and federal agencies do have unique parameters for protecting data, the broad capabilities for cybersecurity are common, and by ensuring a common basis for these requirements, the needs of federal would be included into vendor solutions. The result will be increased agency access to a broader range of innovative tools from across the market. Now, taking a step back, the differences that we're espousing here between federal and private systems are often what we think of as a little less substantial than we usually think about, because the major capabilities and functions that are needed are essentially the same. And the differences are mostly in edge cases. A good example is FIPS cryptography. Federal systems must always use FIPS algorithms and modules for cryptography, and as defined by NIST. But of course, many of these same algorithms and the modules are perfectly acceptable to industry. Everybody's using, well, most everybody's using AES in the Western world. We're all using SHA, we're all using HMAC. These are all standards defined by NIST. Everybody's using them. What we need to do, though, is make sure that everybody's using them in the same way. NIST is even going lately, what I think is a step in the right direction, where they're actually updating their cryptographic algorithm testing program to automate the system. What this could mean is we could be expanding the use of validated algorithms, meaning we know that they are properly functioning, they're implemented correctly, into the broader community. So we would be able to know that a vendor solution for a bank is properly using AES, and then that solution, since it's using a properly vetted AES, might be able to meet certain government requirements. Because of the many similarities, federal leaders should continue to seek out opportunities to participate and collaborate with industry groups and programs alongside other major private sector enterprises. A good example today is the federal partnership by several different agencies in the FIDO Alliance, which is an industry-led standard for secure authentication. So I participated in the FIDO Alliance, and I was actually there when we had multiple government agencies, both from the US and international, actually approaching the board of directors at the FIDO Alliance and asking for inclusion in there so that they could participate both in the standards development and be able to provide that feedback directly to government clients and customers so that they could better take advantage of this potential new technology that's being developed. Now, it's not always easy, right? Not all industry groups are going to want to have federal participation. That is as it is. They're especially not going to want it from maybe certain agencies that we won't bother to name. But this isn't always the case, and many of these groups will be open to have participation by federal government. The key is having the appropriate agencies participating. Many times this could probably be NIST. NIST being non-controversial, being a standards body, most people would be generally welcome to have NIST participating. But other times it could be an agency that's related to the group that's in question. An example was maybe for something related to financial services, having someone like the Federal Reserve, having IT people within the Federal Reserve participating within a group such as a PCI or something like that, where then you have people who are talking a similar language already because they're talking about finance and how the banks work, how transfers occur, and those would be appropriate people. Maybe more appropriate than a NIST person who deals more with the security on a more theoretical level than someone from the Federal Reserve who might be more specific and into the details of what actually happens in financial transactions. But by having this common cybersecurity language across the federal agencies, participation by one agency in a working group could support any agency, since the common framework of the requirements would be what would be pursued within the work group. And this means that an agency could be working for its own best interests and needs, but also at the same time be representing the full federal government by proxy due to these common requirements. This would allow, the participation would potentially allow federal agencies to accelerate their procurement process by influencing and adopting standards and solutions sooner, which would position the agencies to accept products that meet these standards from these groups. With this approach, vendors could ensure early design specs and products that would adhere to unified standards across customers and industries. Federal security leaders such as NIAP could accept security certifications to requirements that they have participated in as valid for security systems, instead of only being able to accept the ones that they have defined. If they're helping participate in a third-party group, that could be added to the list of approved NIAP products, and therefore expand the range of products that could be accepted and the time frame in which they could be accepted. For the majority of federal deployments, having common requirements with the private sector would also mean that vendors could be building their systems and solutions that meet the federal requirements up front, not as special versions with extensive modifications, which always increases the cost. Moreover, this would meet federal technology needs earlier and more continually, because we would be able to bake those solutions in from the start instead of after the fact. The result is that the federal government would be able to adopt cutting-edge technology solutions faster, more efficiently, and cheaply. Federal government participation in industry standards bodies and groups would also create more opportunities for industry to participate in federal-sponsored targeted industry forums. Through targeted industry forums, the agencies would be able to incorporate more commercial expertise and knowledge into the building of specific government security requirements. For example, the FIDO Alliance, again, I'll bring that up. The government is able to participate in helping define the requirements for the security of the platform so that FIDO compliance systems could be utilized for enhanced authentication requirements inside the US government. And we've seen in our work through both Samsung and the FIDO Alliance how NIST, the NSA, the DoD have all shown a lot of interest in this and is looking at how they can utilize this to enhance authentication going forward. Other examples, as I'd mentioned before, could be the PCI Security Standards Council. There's also things like the Cloud Security Alliance related to Microsoft Azure and such, working on how to deploy things securely in the cloud. More participation in these types of forums and groups would help spread the government requirements out into the industry, and then hopefully raise industry as well as provide vendors with a single set of requirements. Okay. So one last thing I want to point out is that Samsung has been doing this for several years, and one thing as vendors is we prioritize our return on investment for the maximum return. And while federal requirements are always key, we need to make sure that they're matched within the private sector, because as long as they're not matched in the private sector, we always treat them as add-ons that get added later for more cost and less frequent deployment. So by bringing these requirements in earlier, we will be able to more readily meet the requirements for federal across industry. The end result of all of this is we will increase security, and we'll have a safer government and a safer society. Thank you. Thanks.